In less than a few decades, these images could become a relic of the past. The ecosystems that were once known as colorful and full of life are struggling with the consequences of climate change and are slowly losing their colors. Coral reefs are sometimes referred to as the rainforests of the sea. They are among the most complex and fascinating marine ecosystems, and are home to an incredible amount of biodiversity. By covering less than 1% of the ocean floor, they support over 25% of all marine life. But what are corals? Though coral may look like a colorful plant, it is actually an animal. Corals are known as colonial organisms because many tiny individual creatures, called coral polyps, live and grow while connected to each other. But coral polyp bodies are usually clear. The bright colors that characterize many corals comes from various types of algae growing safely within the polyp's tissue. The corals live in a symbiotic relationship with the algae. The polyps have tentacle-like structures for capturing food and excreting calcium carbonate to create a hard exoskeleton. The algae uses the coral's waste products for photosynthesis. Byproducts of photosynthesis include oxygen and carbohydrates, which the coral consumes and uses to build reefs. But this symbiotic relationship might come to an end. Coral reefs have declined by 50% since 1950, partly because they are sensitive to water conditions. Warming waters, pollution, ocean acidification, overfishing, and physical destruction are killing coral reefs around the world. A problem that can have long-reaching effects on humans and marine species. Both pollution and the rise in water temperature due to global warming can cause coral bleaching, a process where they end their symbiotic relationship with the algae, typically expelling them and turning white. Coral are still alive when they bleach, but they are at high risk and many eventually starve and die, turning a dark brown. People first noticed coral bleaching events in the 1980s. The problem intensified in 2016, when an extreme increase in water temperature killed off a third of the corals on the Great Barrier Reef. Since then, roughly half the corals on Australia's famous reef have died in subsequent bleaching events, like the most widespread event in 2020, where around 2,300 kilometers of the reef were severely bleached. Between 2014 and 17, around 75% of the world's tropical coral reefs experienced heat stress severe enough to trigger bleaching. For 30% of the world's reefs, that heat stress was enough to kill coral. But why should we care? The world's coral reefs do more for the planet than provide underwater beauty. They are an important link in the food web and give animals a place to spawn and develop. Nearly a quarter of all the fish in the sea rely on healthy coral reefs. The Northwest Hawaiian Island coral reefs, for example, are home to about 7,000 species of plants and animals. Besides that, reef tourism brings in billions of dollars each year and support thousands of jobs. They generate a significant part of the economic income in tropical regions like Australia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and more than 100 other countries. An estimated 500 million people earn their livelihoods from the fishing stocks and tourism each year. Coral reefs also act as natural barriers that absorb the force of waves and storm surges, keeping coastal communities safe. Without them, we must rely on man-made sea walls that are expensive, less effective, and environmentally damaging to construct. Finally, reefs offer promising medical prospects to treat bacterial infections, viruses, and diseases like Alzheimer's and cancer. More than half of all new cancer drug research focuses on marine organisms, many of which can be found on coral reefs. So how can coral reefs be preserved? Schemes to save those reefs are as creative as they are varied. Most recently, scientists released data showing that marine protected areas can help save reefs if they are placed in just the right spots. Medicines are used to help the algae to survive during the breeding process and times of environmental stress. Beyond those methods, scientists are looking to a more hands-on approach to keep the wild ecosystem alive. They are harvesting samples of the corals that can tolerate extreme and rapid changes in its environment, breeding them by hand and reattaching them to the reef. Those coral are often referred to as supercoral. Further study of these species could help identify the genes that make them more tolerant, which then could be used in enhanced coral breeding, also known as assisted evolution, where they added their genes to increase their resilience and chances of survival under stress, giving scientists hope they might one day restore reefs with more heat-tolerant coral. But one question remains: will it be enough? The truth is, coral reefs are dying rapidly. If temperature increases by just 2 degrees Celsius, coral reefs could decline by 99% or higher. If we don't fight to stop climate change, coral reefs could be the first ecosystem entirely lost to the climate crisis in just a few decades.